Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. This is another Red Pill Religion podcast. Red Pill Religion, where we say science does not belong to atheist ideologues or so-called skeptic ideologues or so-called rationalist ideologues. Free inquiry depends on being able to explore all ideas, especially science, by the way. So support our work on redpillreligion.com. You will find that we have our PayPal, our Bitcoin, our free maker, our maker support links are there. We have articles as well as regular videos appearing on that site. Find us also on Gab at Red Pill Religion. Find us on maker support at Red Pill Religion. Please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe. Please tell your friends or enemies. Materialism is dead. Atheism is dead. Long live true free-thinking paradigms. So with all that aside, again, it's me as usual as Max. Tonight, I'm very, very, very lucky. I have some smart people here who are going to be discussing a subject I don't know much about, and so I'm going to get to mostly sit and just listen. We have joining us tonight is Christian from Christian Idealism. Say hi, Christian.
Hello.
You might want to look for it links in the low bar, plus it's up here on the screen. You find his Christian Idealism channel there. And oh, look, I was listening to some music before the show. Sorry. Yes, I like weird stuff. Johanan Raatz's channel. You will also find the link below, and you will see his work there. He does a lot of work on philosophy and quantum physics. And also joining us is someone who's been with us before, Mr. Brass. Say hello, Mr. Brass.
Hello there, everyone. I'm Mr. Brass.
Okay, so what's actually going to happen here is Mr. Brass and Johanan are mostly going to be discussing the topic of materialism, and specifically something called eliminative materialism. And they're going to be debating it or discussing it. And hopefully learning. Johanan is extremely knowledgeable, so he's absolutely worth listening to. You don't have to agree or think he's always right about everything, but you are never wasting your time to listen to him, I find. I know less about Mr. Brass's background on things, but before we begin, what is eliminative materialism? And first, what we're going to do is we're going to have Christian here. He's going to give us a real short, make note of this in your brains, guys, because once you know these terms, they're useful to know, and they really help you think about things. What are materialism, realism, and idealism, Christian?
Well, okay, here's the first thing. Well, materialism is a form of realism. Realism can be broader sense. A dualist could be a realist, but typically, realism is defined as physical, in this case, physical realism, where objects exist independent of observation, where they have their precise properties and processes independent of any conscious observer. What this means is that even if you were to leave the room right now, the properties that exist in the room, they would still be there, regardless of whether or not the mind is there to perceive it. Idealism, however, is the opposite, where you have mind as primary, and basically the matter would be pretty much an illusion or emergent from the mind. And then, so yeah, that's basically the idea behind it. There's a lot more forms of idealism, but that's basically what those two ideas hold. So that's it. Dean. Dean. You're muted.
I apologize. I was muted, everybody. Okay, so let's put it to you this way. The way I would put it so that the average person can understand it, we're going to be talking about materialism. The way you won't normally understand idealism is that you think the universe is basically information, knowledge, ideas first, and matter comes second, more or less. And then you have materialism, where you think everything is pretty much just an outgrowth of material processes. Now, it gets much deeper than that because there's variations on all these, but that's the basic idea. Is everything an emergent effect of a matter, or is matter something that does it even exist, or is it really all just information? or is it respondent to information? I mean, think about it, guys. Why you hear that gravity makes things move, but why? And why does it do so in an orderly, predictable fashion that you can use, etc.? Something, there's an ultimate logic underlying things, at least for those who aren't materialists. Materialists tend to think everything is just an outgrowth of materials, which, in any case, there's a specific subset called eliminative materialism. What is eliminative materialism for the audience?
Well, eliminative material. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you want me to say it, or you want Christian idealism to say it?
Somebody explain what it is, what eliminative materialism is to the audience.
All right, well, I'll say it, since I feel like, since it is my position, I'll be defending here. Eliminative is the thesis that our common sense conception of psychological phenomena constitutes a radically false theory. Basically, eliminative materialism holds that basically how the Cartesian language and how we typically think about the brain is ultimately reducible down to the brain. There is no mind per se, it's just brain. I prefer to say that, I don't want to say this is a debate. I consider it more of a discussion because we're all friends here. I find like debates tend to be, have
Us
more
versus
like
them.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't, me and Johan discuss this on Facebook. We don't have any problems with each other. We just have a disagreement on a subject.
Okay, so let me I just want the audience coming in knowing nothing. I want to make sure I understand your view. You are defending the idea of eliminative materialism, and you think mind does reduce to matter.
Yes, I believe that there's ultimately.
That's what you're defending. You know what? With that on the line, I'm going to let you both just go now. Everybody get it now. He's defending the proposition that your mind is basically just, it reduces down to the material components of your mind. I don't believe that, but I'm not here to debate him. I want to hear what Johanan's got to say and how well he defends himself. So take it away, boys. It's your show. I'll just let you know when we hit like 45 minutes and an hour, and whenever you want to be done, let me know.
So, you mentioned that the whole notion of like the Cartesian language regarding consciousness is that the thesis is that that's an illusion, right? Or it's wrong. The Cartesian concepts of the mind are wrong.
I think like I like to describe it like I've described it on Facebook before. It's kind of like how we typically like to say something begins to exist. When you get around to a fundamental level, we know that language isn't suitable, but we're kind of. I kind of think that that's how this plays out, where it's helpful in the sense of saying, the mind in an average day conversation, but like between, when we get down to the a more academic level, we know what we mean by these terms.
Okay, I see what you're getting at, but I don't think that where I would differ is that I don't think that the parallel follows. And the reason there is that yes, it's a common everyday kind of language, right, on the one side, but the problem is that the reason it's a common everyday language is that it's also the starting point of all of our epistemology. So while it's a common everyday language, it's also the jump off point into how we get into epistemology. For example, eliminative materialism, correct me if I'm wrong, it's motivated by neuroscience, correct?
Yes, we tend to hold proponents of eliminative materialism tend to base all of our understanding off like neuroscience, and we ultimately hold that like in the end goal would be that once we have a completed model, we won't need anything else more to that. Like we won't need to really explain the mind because there won't be no mind to really explain.
Okay, so the issue with that is neuroscience is itself built into science, right? I mean, it's a subset of science as a discipline, right?
Correct.
But a methodology and an epistemology, correct?
Correct.
And when you look
there's different epistemologies you can have to it, but yeah, you're right.
It's based on a scientific methodology and epistemology in a sense. So
yes,
what that is though is that scientific methodology is empiricism, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in order to have empiricism, though, you need to. I'm sure you may be familiar with the Kantian noumenon phenomenon divide, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have
Yeah, I've read
sensation.
somewhat into it.
What?
Yeah, I've read somewhat into it.
Okay, so you have your
I've been,
sensations, and the other side of your sensations is the material world or the whatever world that you're observing, right?
yeah, I've heard of the terms. I recently was reading into the philosophy of the mind by David Chalmers, where
Yeah.
in preparation for this discussion, just so I made sure I understood some of the
Right.
terminology.
Okay, so now if you were to bridge the phenomenon, our perceptions, with the world outside of our perceptions, the noumenon, you'd have to have some logical connection linking the two together, right?
Um, hmm. I mean, I get what you're going to get at with here. Like, we've discussed this before with the whole, you know, like my position really comes down to the idea that we have like colors is a perception that we tend to have. Like color, like the color red is like something we would call like a phenomenon. Like, and this has also often been presented as a problem for a materialist because a wavelength doesn't have a color to it.
Right. It
So
correlates to one, but it's not.
yeah, so I mean that's often brought up as a problem for materialist. Now, obviously, I don't share that it is a problem per se. I think more or less like we experience these things like based on our ability to recognize patterns, and we tend to like if I raised you to leave like the color like what we describe as like I'm laying on a red couch right now. If I were to raise you from birth to think that this couch is not red but blue, you would associate this pattern with blue instead of like what everyone else would think is red. So we kind of have like, it's more of a like the color red is more or less how we describe, this pattern that we see. It's not really there per
Right.
se.
But the thing about that is, though, is that you're trying to like get rid of the qualia, right? I mean, that's the whole Dennett's approach to trying to. You think that it's a kind of language that we use.
Mhm.
The problem there is that, I mean, language is what labels something, right? So you have language comes after the thing that it labels, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could. I mean, I guess it can go either way. We change things. Either we can change things, and sometimes,
As a general rule
like,
of thumb, is a kind of a principle, right?
yeah, it's kind of. I would say yeah, it's like a kind of a principle. I would
Yeah.
say not always, but most of the time.
So the thing about this is that qualia are so basic, though, that like we don't like. I mean, I've seen, for example, colors that I don't know the names of yet.
Mhm.
So I can't put a label on them because I just don't know but the thing is that despite there being, it's not a way of talking about because I know about the color before I look at it, right?
Mhm. I mean, I get that. My thing when approaching to it's like this. When you go into JJC Smart, you get into his work. Like he gives this example where you say, let's just say you see a round, blurry edged after image, which is yellowish towards its edge and orange towards its center. Now, under my view, you're not really reporting anything per se, but you're pressing a sort of temptation to say this physical object is a statement. When you report a pain, you're not really reporting anything, but you're just doing like a sophisticated wince, like you're just aka replacing like brain behavior.
Right, but that's not the case though, because I can introspect onto my pain, right? And I can, when I look at it, I see that there's not brain behavior there. Like I can say, I'm feeling pain, but when I try and think really hard about what this thing I'm calling pain is, what comes to mind is the sensation of like a bad physical feeling. It's not neurons shooting around in a certain kind of pattern, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah.
There's two different
Like
things.
I don't go into like people always have this odd view that, like, because I do read Dennett's work on this, like, that somehow I'm embedded into everything that he says. No, I disagree with him on a lot of things. Like,
Good.
I'm not like, I'm not a big, like, I'm not like against his multiple drafts model, but I'd say it's more of a rough draft of what, like, will come later. I think there is some flaws in it, but I don't think it's like entirely off basis.
Okay. So now back to the larger point I wanted to make, though, is that when you do empiricism, like the whole notion of having empirical knowledge of the outside world, right? It comes in terms of things like qualia, right? Perceptions.
Yeah.
So when you perceive the outside world, the world on the other side, you can't, let me put it this way, you can't have empirical data, right? Unless you first presuppose qualia. Like if you put off all qualia, you would never have any access to be able to study an outside world, to have science, and then therefore you would never be able to do neuroscience either. Because of course,
I know. Well, I kind of go back and forth on epistemology. If anyone read my Facebook, epistemology, is really more of a difficult subject to lay on the grounds of. But I mean, I would say lately, with my knowledge, I would be more into the interpretist camp, like, which is kind of like where Dennett goes, where we sort of adopt a predictive behavior towards something. Like, we know we're right based on the success of this intentional strategy that we lay out. Like, if you want to say, how many, like, I don't know how, when you say, like, how many rocks will this rock sink into the bottom of a pool? Like, what are the odds of these groups of rocks sinking into a pool? Well, first of all, you have to adopt a strategy in order to get that result. Because if, you don't have a strategy per se, then, you can't really have a method of really doing the experiments.
right,
I don't really think you don't really need qualia for it. You just need more or less a strategy.
Right, but what I'm saying is that the whole notion of treating these things as strategies, it comes from neuroscience, right?
I mean, neuroscience isn't dedicated to any particular, view. But I would say
method as a whole is kind of, I mean, the whole notion that these things can be reduced to strategies is kind of, it's based on a scientific method as a whole, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's sort of like I know you have a problem with from your discussions with King Crocoduck, but it's like, I would say it's sort of like instrumentalist. You could say like I don't know, like, I would say not all interpretists are instrumentalists, but I would say a lot of them tend to be.
Right, but you can't have instrumentalism without, well, firstly, instrumentalism is logically flawed in that it doesn't have an a priori foundation. Like, it's not basic, it's not justified itself on anything, right?
I mean, I haven't really got into it. I mean, I do believe that I haven't really got into into it per se. I have got looked into it. I think it works well with an interpretist perspective. But like I said, not all adopt that. My problem really with qualia would be per se is that when we try to if we try to do like empiricism on qualia, we tend to, for one, it tends not to be well defined. And when we tend to try to, like, let's say, Dennett gives like this example, like tasting orange juice. He goes into that like in his book, where, in the morning, like I take a sip of orange juice, and I wait 5 minutes, and I take another sip. Now there'll be two differences in that, like my taste, because maybe I had some bread in the span of the 5 minutes that makes the orange juice sweeter, or it makes it lighter, or more ding. And it would be okay to talk in terms of the way juice tastes to me at time t is different than the way the juice tastes at the other point, like of time point 2. But we realize this is a mistake because we're trying to isolate qualia from everything else that is going on. So, and we also end up going into the problem of like the brainstorm machine, where if I hooked your brain up to mine to see your experiment, to see, your perceptions, we could invert the switches to do that, and it might come out different, but we're making the assumption that qualia is something that we can do that with. It's the problem, the inverted qualia. I don't know if you've heard of that. Johan?
Johan. He's not responding. Okay. So I don't know where he is, but Dean, can you still hear me? I wanted to remember that paper I wrote the other day. I want to see if Mr. Brass here can respond to any of the arguments per se.
Sure, I'd be happy to try.
Hold on. Johanan, I don't know where he is. Okay. Okay, I can see him. Yeah, I see him. I see you. We can't hear you though. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Okay.
But we can talk Christian idealism.
Yeah, let's talk. Okay.
Until Johan.
Well, I think.
Can,
deal with his technological issues. But yeah, starting points, as I think you agree with me with this on Facebook, is that idealists tend to start with the mind, whereas you tend to start with the brain. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's the main difference that me and Johan have, and I guess you too, is like we all have presuppositions, and I find that, well, idealists do make good points. I won't deny that. I find, that they presuppose the brain with, I don't think, enough justification for it. Well, I think presupposing the brain, we have, plenty of support for it.
Well, what do you mean by? Do you think that physical realism is true? Because I believe, as an idealist, I do believe that the brain exists. I just don't think that the brain is causing my conscious experience. And so I guess our disagreement is, where is our starting point? And I would say our starting point is the mind. And I have very strong reasons for that have to do with my epistemology, which, again, we can discuss that.
Yeah, that's always important to go through with this kind of subject.
Right.
Hi.
Okay, we can hear you, Johanan.
Okay,
yeah, that's
good.
better.
Okay, so here's the problem.
Wait, Johanan.
All of the evidence you use to support, the notion is that the source of the brain exists, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't deny that. I think it's a information construct, right? You guys can hear me okay, right?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, but the problem with that is that anything in the external world, which includes the brain, is dependent. Our knowledge of its existing is itself dependent on our knowledge of qualia. So the problem is in order to presuppose the brain, you have to first presuppose the mind and mental categories. Like, if you got rid of all qualia, well, qualia is itself empirical knowledge, empirical data. So if you get rid of qualia, then you have to get rid of empirical sensation, which in turn undercuts the entire foundation of science. Like, there can be no science without empirical sensation, but empirical sensation is in turn the same thing as qualia.
I don't really,
so
wouldn't really say that.
Qualia, you actually cut off science as well as neuroscience, which in turn, eliminative materialism is motivated by neuroscience. So if you get rid of neuroscience, then you have to get rid of eliminative materialism as well. So when eliminative materialism says that you have to get rid of qualia, it actually cuts itself off and it reduces itself to quote unquote folk psychology.
Yeah, we got into that before in the little Facebook group. I find that with the folk psychology, I think that it has many inherent problems. Like, just so people, understand what folk psychology is, it's pretty much that our mentalistic vocabulary should be understood in the same way as our theoretical terminology is, in general. Would you say like that's a correct definition?
I don't know. I haven't heard it described that way. I've heard it described more in terms of like the kind of common sense first person reports of consciousness.
Well, I mean, I was getting this from, more the academic work, so I know. I mean, that could, I guess, people can have differences on that. Like, I take, like, what I'm probably going to butcher the name, but I'm going to try anyway. Amir Lakatos, basically when you say is like, folk psychology, the folk psychology that we've adopted today is pretty much the same that we have done for like 2,000 years, and it really hasn't progressed us anywhere in terms of understanding the brain better.
The reason I would say it hasn't progressed us anywhere is that it's the foundation for everything else. Like, when you start with something, it's literally the starting point of all your knowledge. So when you start there, of course, it hasn't progressed you anywhere in itself, but what it has done is provide the foundation for everything else to progress from. Like, there would be no neuroscience if there wasn't also folk psychology.
Well, I mean, obviously Eliminative Materialists disagree with that because we agree that like we just need to update, the language in which that we work with.
Based on, though. Here's the problem. The update has to be based on something that is already grounded in
something else. It's something else. That's what I was.
Well, I mean, yeah, it'd be descriptive.
So if our update is based in our current knowledge, right? All of our knowledge progresses in a kind of linear fashion, right? There's like steps we take. We start with basic stuff, then we kind of proceed from there, and we got empiricism from there, and we get it from there. We have science, we have neuroscience, we have details of neuroscience, and you poke the amygdala and you get angry and all that. The point with all this is that in that whole step, right, you can change something, right? You can say this is a better theory than this theory here, right? The problem is that you do that, you have to change everything else down the line as well, right? Everything else based on that concept that you change your theory without, you replace one theory with another one. When you have the new theory in place, everything else that you previously explained with the old theory now has to be explained with the new theory, right?
Well, I mean, I would say like basically it would be folk psychology versus how Eliminative Materialists would say is the completed neuroscience, where we would simply be taking the completed model and just simply updating the language to fit the completed model.
But the problem is what is the completed neuroscience based on?
We would tend to believe that instead of talking about things in terms of like, pain or, like those kind of qualities, instead we focus on them from a brain process perspective.
Right, but okay, well, there's a second problem with that as well, but we'll get to that in a second. But first I want to get into the issue of when you tied all the mind states to brain processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But your entire frame of doing this, your entire program of going into neuroscience and poking around the brain to see what connects to, what causes what states, right?
Yeah, well, what they correlate to. As we do with all sciences, trying to find correlations.
That is based on science, and in turn, science is an empiricism. But the problem is empiricism is based on qualia.
I would say it's based on a strategy. Like,
well, no, the strategy is based on. There wouldn't be such a strategy. You wouldn't be able to have a strategy about the outside world if there was no perceptions. You wouldn't even that there is an outside world to Like you could think your strategies are working well, but maybe you're just hallucinating them all. And the reason you don't know if you're
Well, I mean,
hallucinating
we
them
could
all
say
is
that with any idea. Like, I mean,
problem
even under an idealist perspective, if we grant, we could always be facing the problem of saying that, well, yeah, the mind is central, but we could also be saying that the experiments that we're basing off of to show idealism is, we're just is open to the possibility that all of our theories can be wrong and disproven one day.
The problem with what I'm getting at here is that not that, because any theory could be wrong or etc. But what I'm getting at here is that in the case of eliminativism, what it's rejecting, it's not just wrong, it's wrong in a self-contradictory kind of way. When you get rid of the qualia, it implodes the foundation on which neuroscience and advancement in neuroscience would happen. And if that's the case, you wouldn't even be thinking to, without neuroscience, you'd never think of this concept of folk psychology in the first place.
Okay, guys, I think, we've reached this. I think this is I think we can start discussing this with this whole idea of self-contradictory, this idea that eliminative materialism is ultimately self-contradictory just because it's essentially, it has to deny the thing that in order for eliminative materialism to be justified, it has to literally reject the thing that justifies it in the first place, which in this case would be the mind. And so I want to share screen hold on, I'll share screen real quick.
Well, let's put it this way. The justification of eliminative materialism is itself folk psychology and therefore must be eliminated.
Right. And so you guys see my screen here?
Yeah, I see it.
Dean, you want to share screen, or I don't know if you can do that, but basically, okay, so I'm just going to start off with the first argument. So premise 1 is doubting requires a mind to doubt something. Premise 2, eliminative materialists doubt the mind is doubting something, therefore eliminative materialists doubt the mind with their mind, which again, it seems like it's self-refuting, because if you doubt your mind, there has to be a doubter, which would be your mind. So it seems, I mean, it just seems like this position is self-refuting. How would you respond to that, Brass?
Well, I mean, I take what, Thor, he's Swedish, I think, Thor, Thunderson or something like that. His book, The User Illusion, goes into this perception of, of the brain as consciousness is what we know it is, like what we see as conscious, like, is only actually one, like, a millionth of what is actually going on. Because in I'm trying to get how to word this correctly, like, our brain discards bits of information. It discards, like, the user illusion is that we get this idea that, what we're seeing is the full picture of everything. Then it compares it to, like, if I were to put, like, a portrait in front of you, but I only were to, like, put in, like, a dot here or a dot here, your mind from a certain perspective would, fill in the gaps and might see a human in there. So, it goes to show that our mind, sort of just, like, we have this idea that what we're seeing is the full picture of reality, when in reality it's only like in a millionth of what is the total brain capacity of what's going on inside. I like to compare it to, like, this phone that I'm talking on. Like, I can press a button. I can press a button, like if I was gonna say, type you a message, say, "Hi, Johan," or "Hi, Christian Idealism, how you doing?" From my perspective, it looks as if, I'm doing something remarkably simple, that I'm getting the full processes. Like, this is the full accurate thing that I'm getting. But in reality, the synapses and what's going on behind the phone is vastly more complicated than just me typing out the message. And the way I see with consciousness is like that's how the user illusion works, where we think that we're seeing the full picture of reality, but in reality, we're just getting like a digested version of it.
Right, about that. The reason this is kind of interesting because it brings in another topic is that you can turn that on its head and say, yes, we don't see the world as it is, right? But because we don't see the world as it is, the thing about this is though is that means that you can't get neurons from your perspective, right?
Hey,
Sorry.
Gentlemen, we are coming up on about 45 minutes. You may go as long as you wish. I'm just letting you know.
Okay.
Yeah, I was hoping to go for about like an hour. And I'll be, I think,
then you have about 15 minutes to start wrapping up.
All right.
All right.
Minutes. Anyway.
All right. So I'll let Johan, say what he's going to say because he was left off.
Yeah. So what I was getting at is that the fact that you don't know what's going on in your brain. When you look at your mind and you don't know what's going on in your brain, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and you could say that therefore that means that those two things are not identical.
Oh, I see what you're doing there. You're doing the sorry.
There is more going on in your brain than you know, right? And it happens to correlate to your consciousness, but the fact that you're not actually aware of it means that it doesn't have an identity with your consciousness. They're two separate things, right?
I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm trying to think. Trying to think of the philosophical word, like the property of. I think it's the property, like I can't remember who did it. Like I think it's Lebanese or something like that. I can't remember who his name is. Where he did like if two things are only identical if they have such and such property A and such property A, and if they happen to share these properties and they are the same, and if they do not, they are not. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, it's that. It's Leibniz's law.
I remember we discussed that. With the concepts of the universality of our thoughts, along with the intentionality, which has often from Idealist and some other like property dualist, where they said that's the idea of like intentionality is harder for the materialist to come up with because for what is about something. Is that correct?
I think so. Say that again.
I mean, with my thing with intentionality is like I go all the way back to the interpretive situation where we make the assumption first and foremost, like I'm staring at like a window right now. And this would be a part of like the physical stance of things where I'm making a prediction about how this window works. Like it closes, it opens, the wind comes out. I'm making a prediction and I'm saying intentionality is like that. It's just a prediction of what like an object does. And with working with people, it's the same thing where we make the assumption that people are intentional beings, that they're rational, they're capable of thought, or something like that. Now, whether we're right or wrong about that, that's not we can be wrong on that completely, but it still falls that we make this strategy and we base our knowledge on how well this strategy works. Now, could it just be a happy accident? It could be, but a lot of what people say, like even Lawrence Krauss says, which I completely disagree with him on a lot of things, where he says even the laws of physics themselves could be an accident. So
I
mean,
perceptions in a sense could be an accident based on methodology. Or, the fact that they work as well as a
our strategies could be wrong, but it would still work that within the strategies, like let's say if my idea of saying a rock, oh wait, you go. I've talked a lot.
Quality is wrong, and I kind of have a problem with that because I see it as properly basic. Like I mean, I could say that there's an illusion of a world, but one thing I couldn't say is that there is an illusion that there is something going on that I'm perceiving, right? But even if we were to take qualia as say that it was somehow in some weird way our minds were not thinking right, and it really was folk psychology, and it really was something we could eliminate. Wouldn't that then mean that? Because I mean, all of someone's calling me. I can't. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
I still hear you.
it's a little
We
loud
can-
on me.
Yeah.
Who is this person? I can't. Okay, hold on here. I don't know why that.
They're trying to give me
I
debating
got a call
advice.
from a random person on Facebook, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Anyway,
Yeah, go ahead.
you guys can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, something's really quiet all of a sudden. Weird.
Glitch. All right.
I think it's better. The problem is you have. Oh yes. If you get rid of quality, you say that's just a good, useful strategy that we use at a high level scale. It's not really fundamentally true at a neuronal level. The problem then is that all of our study of neurons, all of our knowledge about all of our statements about neurons, including the completed neuroscience, is itself described in terms of folk psychological language. So if you get rid of the quality, you're going to have to get rid of the other language as well, because all of the other any other language you could have will in some level reduce to folk psychology. Like if you look at what a neuron is, you describe it in close details. Everything that you know about neurons comes to you in terms of qualia. And so ultimately your definition of the outside world has to, including brains and neurons and completed neurosciences, has to break down in the end to folk psychology.
A big part of like I find with the philosophy of the mind is like, you know, we tend to have like this Cartesian method, and that's kind of what Dennett and them critique, is they critique the idea of Cartesian materialism. And they critique other forms that deal with it, where they point out the problem of which folk psychology in breeds with is like the Cartesian language, which the you know, we can all admit that it started off with bad starts, because originally like it was meant to really, you know, prove dualism. You know, it was like that was the big thing that Cartesian philosophy was really going towards. But now, as you know, we have gone into the mind. We know that dualism, I wouldn't say is an impossible position to hold, but it's definitely an improbable one. And I find that, like, you know, since we've already gotten to the point,
as I say, dualism is also false, therefore idealism. Like I think Descartes' epistemology is correct. I don't think his ontology is correct, but I do think his epistemology is correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel you on that. I wonder how much, I know we've been talking a little bit, I wonder how much time we have left. Could Dean tell us?
You can stop any time, but I mean, it's you got approximately, if you want to stop at an hour, you've got approximately 10, 15 minutes. You can stop anytime you want. Are you guys about done?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we have discussed a broad range of the topics.
All right.
I wouldn't say that,
did you come to any conclusion, Mr. Brass?
you know, like I said, I always, you know, I respect Johan's work. I do actually hold like that, like what he says on idealism, you know, like if I were to leave eliminated materialism, I do find that idealism would be either that or I'd say property dualism would be like one of my second decisions if I had to choose something else. I just find that, you know, eliminated materialism is just simply simpler. It makes less, you know, it makes less, you know, it doesn't like violate Occam's razor. It doesn't like really add on to anything, and it works with something that we already know.
For the record, I'm unconvinced, and I'm much more on Johanan's side. But these are interesting topics to explore. Anyway, what's that, Johanan?
What I would say though is, in my view, I would think that idealism is actually simpler in terms of like it's it's very parsimonious epistemically, and you just need your consciousness to demonstrate it, as it were, from a philosophy of mind. But also, I would argue that, well, eliminative materialism I don't see as coherent. I mean, you may see it simpler, but I don't see it as coherent, simply because I see anything based on science as also based on mental categories as well. And then secondly, I also see it as kind of like you can have a simpler explanation for something, but it doesn't make it the right explanation. If it doesn't explain the phenomenon in question, then it isn't the right explanation, right? And you could, I could say, you could pop up any, like, say fairy dust explains why plants grow, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you could do that. It's a really simple explanation. Fairy dust is a really simple parsimonious thing, but it doesn't address, why leaves are green, why they have photosynthesis, why they, only grow at certain times of the year, why they need fertilizer, etc. It rejects all of those facts.
Oh yeah, I agree. I'm saying, like, it's just one of the things, like, I think eliminating materialism does. Like, we can get into, like, the other methods, like, such as predictability, degree of ad hocness.
Well, the problem I have with eliminative materialism is that it rejects, in my view, it rejects a large category of the evidence, the only category of evidence that it refers to as folk psychology.
Hmm.
Like, it doesn't.
I see more of it. It's
weigh them.
Oh, you go ahead.
So it can be parsimonious, but when it rejects the very evidence it's supposed to be explaining, it can't really be seen as an explanation at all.
I don't see, like, it's really getting away. It's just really pointing out, like, the evidence. Like, it's saying that, like, what our language and how we, like, this evidence that we're saying is really there. It's, it can be better explained by just simply updating, like, our terminology, and simply realizing that we're in a different stage and we have to get rid of some things. It's not really doing away with the evidence. It's like, we can say that it's helpful to some extent, but ultimately, like, we know that this language is, has to be gone away with.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think it's possible to coherently get away with get rid of the language. But you're saying, but the thing is, I don't think it's possible to eliminate that kind of language. Like, number one, I think it's the basic, like, immediate, foundation for knowledge. Number two, I think getting from that is, if you do get rid of it, it's going to end up creating, you're going to explode your epistemology as well as everything on which you base your neuroscience. Now, on thought dwell, I would say that there's a very simple way in which you can account for both the evidence.
Man, I cannot hear you. We cannot hear you anymore, Johanan. You were sounding at the table. We can't hear you anymore.
It's not going out.
Tell you what. Yeah, try to make it real fast. Let's just get this wrapped up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you.
Let's just get this wrapped up.
All right. So, what I was getting at is that if you get yes, I don't want to get rid of neuroscience. It's hard, don't say it's all wrong. It's not. But what I was pointing out is that the correlations that you have to brain states that are apparently material, that's debatable otherwise, but the brain states that are apparently material and correlating to conscious states, you don't have to necessarily say that those are not there. What you can do is simply say all the processes, all the different brain processes that correspond to mental states are in fact there, and yes, those brain processes do correspond to mental states, but there is what I would call a quantifiable trait attached to those mental states. So somewhere in the architecture of the neurons, there's some quantified, like some protein state or molecular state that is probably entangled, and it maps across the neural state. So if you were to disrupt the neural pattern, it would also disrupt the neural state, the quantum state, which would then turn the consciousness off or on, or you could perturb it, or you could break it down, and the fundamental bits of consciousness would be there, using this quantum cognition as a literal thing, as quantum idealism does. And you could just simply then attach that to the structure of the neurons, and you would have all the data back from neuroscience, right? all there. That's all parsimonious, but you wouldn't also have to pretend that the consciousness doesn't exist or is eliminated, right? So you can actually make a very simple model of neuroscience that accounts for the consciousness. You don't have to reduce it to materialism, because you can, then you can say the brain itself is made of mental stuff, quantum information. And we have a very good case that it's made of quantum information that's not material in physics, and we just then add on, well, it's also mental. And so you have one layer. It's not your mind, though. It's some other, mental program in Hilbert space. And then you have added onto that a smaller program, as you call it, based on some quantum biological structure that traces onto the neurons. And then as you disrupt the neurons, it also disrupts the quantum state in them. And therefore, it affects the consciousness.
All right, well, that was very interesting. I hope the audience enjoyed it and got into it. This is all very interesting stuff. Really, when you think about it, guys, I mean, you might even want to go back and listen to some of what they were saying there. It's an interesting question, is our consciousness solely all, I mean, I argue myself, from everything I've seen and everything I've seen over the years, I simply don't find any materialist explanation for the mind satisfactory myself. But others do agree. The interesting thing is, just remember, that's a philosophical position, no matter which position you take. It is not a scientific one. And if anybody tries to tell you that a materialist explanation is the scientific one, they're lying to you about what science is. This is at minimum an open question in contemporary neuroscience, with neuroscientists on all sides of the discussion. So this isn't airy-fairy nonsense. If you're really interested in science, might want to learn some of this. All right, everybody, please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe. Tomorrow night, we're going to have on R.K. Hendricks as part of our Men's Rights Monday. R.K. Hendricks from the Men's Human Rights Movement group, the only decent one on Facebook, will be joining us, and we will be talking about why a young man in the United States or Canada should not get married. There are specific cases where you might want to, but they're pretty rare. They're kind of unusual, and we'll go into that. But in almost all cases these days, marriage is a very bad idea, particularly for young men, even if she's pregnant. So you might want to tune in for that. I'm sure we'll get some fireworks from feminists and others on that one. And otherwise, please give us a subscribe. Please give us a like. Tell your friends or enemies. And God bless everybody.